So you're back for more. You couldn't stay away from the eternal of hot takes. I'm Mr. Combo number 5, one of your stays here at CMDTower. You can always find me at Twitter at Mr. Combo number 5, all spelled out except for the 5.
And this is Murphis, another one of your mainstays over here at CMDTower. You can catch me every week, or most weeks here. And you can also catch my content, my articles, twice a month over at commandersherald.com and at MurphisAlvyMTG on Twitter.
And this is Brian Koval, aka BoshNRoll. I am here just for the hot takes and Council of the Unbanned. You can find me youtube.com/BoshNRoll.
Well, guys, we're starting off super spicy. How does Legacy versus EDH deal with Enter the Battlefield effects? This is something that I truly believe transcends formats. It's just free value. And so everyone's doing it. It's just a matter of, is maybe our older, wealthier uncle, Legacy, doing it the same way us, bratty, privileged kids are in EDH. So, Bosh, give us that Legacy perspective. How does Enter the Battlefield kind of, engage with your format, I guess?
Legacy uses cards that usually ETB draw a card of some variety, or ETB tutor are the sort of things we're looking for. There's niche decks like Slivers or Elves. I guess Elves isn't really a niche deck, but a specialist style deck where something like Reclamation Sage or Harmonic Sliver gets a sideboard slot. But as far as main deck play, Uro Titan of Nature's Wrath is a format defining card. Just the old growth spiral, gain 3 life on the way in and on the way through. And really the main place where you find ETB effects in Legacy is the Death and Taxes archetype. That entire archetype is ETB effects. You got Stoneforge Mystic, Solitude, Recruiter of the Guard, Flicker Wisp. That's like the whole deck with a little Thalia and Mana Disruption to protect the ETB triggers. That's how a mono white deck is allowed to flourish in format as cracked as Legacy.
Wow. So I love how, first off, you said that's how mono white's allowed to flourish. And if no one picked up on it, it's stacks. It's not anything that's healthy and fun. It's I have to slow down everyone else so that way I can do well. Way to go, mono white. And I did find it interesting, obviously constructed 60 card formats, you get to have 4 ofs. So you're able to, hey, this is a great value card and I need more of it. Well, I could just have more copies. We don't get that in Commander or EDH. So I actually see a little bit of the ETBs just kind of naturally happen in Commander. Just every deck, I bet you if it goes through, probably has 5 to 10 things that ETB give it something. Now, whether it's actually pertinent to the commanders, very interesting. Where I actually see EDH get used a ton is I actually think we take your Legacy sideboard mentality, and that's what our main board is. Like the Eternal Witnesses, the Acidic Slimes of the world. A lot of times those almost get slotted as just like good stuff. I just need it in the deck. It's kind of what I see.
You have to. When you have 3 opponents instead of 1, in Legacy, you can play a card like Delver of Secrets that, while it has an incredible rate, all it does is attack and block. And if your opponent spends a lightning bolt on that, you're both down a card. If you play a card that just attacks or blocks in Commander and somebody answers it, you and that person are down a card, and the other 2 players or more, however many people are at your table, are enjoying free card advantage, letting you 2 duke it out. So something like a Reclamation Sage arrives, gets card advantage immediately, then somebody has to spend a removal spell on your thing. So 3 people, or at least 3 cards worth of value, are exchanged around the table instead of 2. And you that's where the ETB triggers, leaving a body behind. Because they're all spells, right? Like there's not a whole lot of unique ETB triggers that, I mean, I'm sure if someone wants to litigate me in the comments, get after it. But like, you can generally be like, yeah, this ETB disenchants, this ETB unsummons, this ETB growth spirals. Like you can find a card that you could put in your deck, but you don't. You play the creature version.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. And I think part of this equation that I see in Legacy, because one of the other least back in my day, old man yelling at the clouds, Snapcaster Mage, right, is one of the most historically powerful creatures with an ETB effect, and it's rebuying, giving flashback to a card in your graveyard, that sort of thing. But the spell plus body mentality, spell plus potential damage, spell plus a clock is really what I see in that Death and Taxes deck, right? Like Flicker Wisp can do some things, Solitude does things, but it's all big ability plus a way to close the game. How do you see that playing its way out in EDH?
Yeah, it's exactly the same. Like there's so many just boom, like giant ETB effects that have been printed into the Commander products specifically, or at least with Commander in mind in the last 10 years or so of design, where something like, I believe it's Zathrid Demon. Is that one of the like ETB destroy all non-demon sort of like 7-drop monsters?
Probably something ridiculous like that. Yeah,
there's a number of
demon or something like that.
Oh yeah, Dreadborn Cacodemon.
Yeah.
I think it comes in, taps all of your creatures, but destroys all of your opponents or something like that.
Yeah, there's so many of those, and you play Damnation, sure. You play that sort of effect in your deck, but like Damnation past the turn, everyone else gets to rebuild before you. Damnation on a 7/7 body or whatever the demon is that does this, or like the various Krakens or Leviathans that bounce everything else when they arrive, like reset the board, pass the turn with my 5/5 or my 7/7, whatever size of the body is on this thing. That's just a totally different equation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And I think part of this, if we're talking about equations, right, like there's that piece of the equation where body plus an effect equals playability. But then what you're sacrificing with a lot of these ETB creatures is actually flexibility on a turn-to-turn basis, right? So thinking of like Stormtide Leviathan or whatever, where it comes in, bounces all the stuff. I think that's the one.
Stormtide's the island one where stuff with flying an island walk can only attack.
Yeah, Cataract
I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah, Cataract Leviathan. So I can play Cataract Leviathan or I can play Cyclonic Rift, right? And there's smaller windows when Cataract Leviathan can buy me the kind of time, space, or advantage that something like Cyclonic Rift would. So how do we think about when to slot one over the other?
I guess mostly that's power level of your table and what your deck's trying to do. If I'm playing a deck where I want to Cyclonic Rift in the player before me's end step, then get nutty, or am I a sort of more honest tap out ramp sort of thing? Or even just like in the instance of specifically Cataract Leviathan, do I have graveyard? Am I self mill? Because that thing has unearth. Or like certain of these effects are on bodies that you can reanimate. Some of them are only if you cast from your hand. Am I a ramp deck? Am I a reanimate deck? Like, what am I doing? And those are the sort of decisions you have to make. And of course, the power level of the table. Are we going to get to 9 mana guaranteed at this table? Then play the Leviathan. Are your friends going to hate you if you cast Cyclonic Rift? Play Leviathan. There's a lot of calculations that could get you to the right decision.
I'll say one calculation for me that kind of between Murphis, that great mindset of the spell or the spell plus the body, it usually comes down, and I'm curious if Legacy's the same way, because you guys are so tuned from my experience talking with you, Bosh, and talking with other people. It's, like even cutting a single CMC out of the total number of CMC in the deck, that can help and go a long way. So one thing that I see myself doing is I look at whatever that ETB effect is on the body, and I say, is that really worth what the CMC cost is and the power and toughness? It's something that Tuck and I talk a lot about on Brews and Builds, where it's like, hey, this card's 6, but this other card costs 4, and it does the same effect. So what if I said you could get that effect, and then for 2 mana more, you get a 4/4 body? Would you say yes to that, or kicker 2? And a lot of people are like, well, yeah, I would. But then it seems like when we actually practically get the card in front of us and we look at it, it's like, gosh, 7 mana for draw 3 on ETB for a 3/4 doesn't seem great. How do you guys kind of look at the CMC to the effect to the power and toughness? And what is there? is there a healthy balance that we could kind of coach people like, hey, you want CMC to equal power and toughness? That's usually a good rate, a lot of people use. How do you guys figure that out?
So there was, in my early days, I had this sort of calculation in my head. And by early days, I mean, I was probably 12 years old, where I was like, the good rate on the creature is the mana cost equals the power and toughness of 4 mana for a 4/4.
4/4, yep.
I expect to spend 5 mana on my 4/4 if it has one ability like Trample. And
Sure.
That's sort of the calculation that was in my head. But cards are better now. And also that was just a really rudimentary understanding of rate on creatures. Generally, it's greater than the sum of its parts. If you think of Snapcaster Mage, I guess Snapcaster Mage is not really a fair example because it just staples an Ambush Viper onto whatever spell you're already playing. But if you think of Unsummon as a 1 mana effect and Grizzly Bear as a 2 mana effect, and for 3 mana you get Mana War, which is an Unsummon attached to a Grizzly Bear, then you're exactly on rate and you're on calculation there. At cantripping, drawing a card on arrival, is a really interesting ETB effect because that just keeps your hand full and it represents so much more. Elvish Visionary, believe it or not, is a legacy staple in only one deck, but it is this 2 mana 1/1 draw card is just the glue of that deck, or one of the pieces of glue. But we don't see a lot of just random wizards that do that effect in blue decks. It's just really contextual. The context of Elvish Visionary, 2 mana 1/1 draw card is not a good rate. 2 mana 1/1 draw card, tap for Heritage Druid is great rate. Add Wirewood Symbiote that's already in this deck. So now we're drawing 2 or 3 cards a turn off the same 1/1 body while making mana with Heritage Druid. Context really pays off here, and you get something equal to much greater than the sum of its parts. Also, 1 mana draw card is a pretty good deal if you're getting I'm not telling you to add Peaked or Reach Through Mist to every deck you play. That's pretty bad.
I am telling you that.
All right. You're alone on that thought. But on just your 1 mana 1/1, your Mons Goblin Raiders, paying 2 to get a card out of that as well, that's a good deal. In general, if I could raise the average CMC of my EDH decks and add and draw a card to every card, I'm gonna take that.
Yeah, right. And I think there's also a question of the quality too, right? So I think of this is not a fair comparison. So get in the comments if you want to get at me, I suppose. But comparing something like Elvish Visionary, right? 2 mana ETB draw card to Stoneforge Mystic without the flash in an equipment ability, right? 2 mana tutor. That quality difference, I think, is one of the biggest difference that impacts EDH. When you're drawing a card off a body, when I'm drawing a card off a body, I want to control either the average quality of my deck by building really low mana so that I'm actually multi-spelling each turn, or I want to guarantee a high impact draw with something like a Stoneforge Mystic, if that makes sense, because I might be card neutral, but I'm playing a low impact creature at a table and being card neutral when you have 3 opponents still isn't a great equation for you. And again, it's contextual, right? An Elvish Visionary in an elf deck can do a lot more than that. Yeah. But
no, that's all super fair. I just think, the biggest thing is ETBs can, like I said at the beginning, it transcends the format. You're going to see it everywhere. I think the biggest thing I've taken away from this is the contextualization of it. There's really no right number of ETB effects you should have in your deck. It's really just going to depend on what your deck wants. I know my Yarok deck, I have almost all ETBs exclusively, and it's because I want to double up on them. All right. Well, guys, I think that's going to wrap up the Legacy versus EDH, specifically around ETB effects. We're going to hear a little bit about our Patreon before we head over to the Countermeta discussion. Do you like CMD Tower content? Do you wish you could have more of it? Well, you should head over to our Patreon, patreon.com/CMDTower. That's where we really lean on the community for help in running our channel, but also giving back to you as well. So for just literally $1 a month, you can join and get tons of soft value, opportunities to be on the show, interact with the collective in our very lively chat. And then for even just $5, $15, or $25, you're going to get swag. You're going to get RK Post tokens. Really, it's one of the best values out there. Patreon.com/CMDTower. All right, we're headed over to Countermeta, and today we're talking green X. I hate this Elfball. So tired of Elfball. And we kind of came up with a few ways to kind of categorize how Elfball usually kind of dominates our Commander games, and hopefully we'll be able to get some legacy tips on how to deal with it. The first area is the excessive ramp that usually an elf deck brings to the table. Some cards that I thought our community, if they aren't aware of them, should be aware of, would be cards like Elvish Guidance. This is a card that we see quite a bit with elf decks just because 2 colorless green, whenever an enchanted land is tapped, it adds a green for every elf in play. It's kind of disgusting. Nissa, Who Shakes the World, Planeswalker, all your 4s tap for double. Gross. Omnath, Locust of Mana. Just float all the green mana you want to and save it for a later day. And honestly, either Selvala, I think, are very standard in a green whatever Elfball, whether it's the mono green Selvala, where you get to draw a card when a creature ETBs, if it's the strongest at the table, but the biggest one is it could tap and add any amount of mana to your mana pool equal to the highest power of creature you control, or the parlay Selvala. Answers I kind of thought around those cards specifically, and kind of how I think people could deal with it, would be cards like Land Equilibrium. I know it's kind of mean, but kind of feel like that's how Elfball people could be dealt with, especially because a lot of times they're in the colors, they're getting a lot of lands out. Land Equilibrium's a card that if an opponent plays a land and they had more lands than you, they have to return a land. So no one can ever actually get higher than you. There's a lot of effects like Burgeonings that allow you to play extra lands when they play lands. And an interesting one I thought would be Wandering Archaic, because there's so many sorceries out there in instance that elf decks will use to also go get stuff out of the deck. Let me copy it for 2 mana. So that was kind of what I thought around just ramping excessively in Elfball decks. BoshNRoll, what are some things and thoughts that you have around the way that these Elfball decks ramp, and maybe cards that people should be on the lookout for, or even need some answers for?
Yeah, the defining thing about elf strategies, which, like we just talked about, is a real established archetype in Legacy, the mana comes from creatures, whether directly or indirectly, whether we're talking about like Llanowar Elves, Heritage Druid, Selvala, those sort of things, or if we're talking about Elvish Guidance or Gaia's Cradle, or things that count the number of creatures you have. Mm-hmm. If you can control the creatures, you can control the mana in a deck like this. And people should have removal in their decks. Just saying. It's not mean to control. Listen, there are things like Magic is a game of interaction. There are questions, there are answers, and it's about pushing it back and forth, moving the pieces around. It is not mean to destroy your opponent's Selvala, because the Selvala player is up to no good. Heritage Druid is an indicator that opponent is up to no good. Nobody's just like, what? I just want to cast Crawlworm with this. No, they don't. Like, it's okay to pick off important creatures. So understanding how the engine works and where to point your removal is one of them. If you have like a Swords to Plowshares or a Lightning Bolt or something clean 1-for-1, knowing where the pressure point is, like take out the Heritage Druid, take out the Selvala, that sort of thing. Take out the Nissa. We were just talking about ETB abilities. ETB, destroy target creature. ETB, deal 2 to a permanent. ETB, destroy target artifact or enchantment. Clip the enablers and you can stop them from getting out of hand. And usually the earlier you hit it, the better, because it snowballs quickly. But a card I really want to draw the attention of everyone to, if you don't know about it, is Curse Totem. This one,
Ah,
this is a card originally from Mirage. It was also in 6th edition, and it was just in Modern Horizons 2, so you can get this thing for a quarter. It's 2 mana artifact. Activated abilities of creatures can't be activated. Period. Like, it doesn't say unless they're mana abilities, nothing of the sort. That Llanowar Elf is a 1/1 for 1, period. So is Heritage Druid. Selvala is a 3 mana 2/4, or whatever the stats on her actually are. Like, that locks it down, and if your deck isn't full of activated abilities on your own creatures, you're probably going to get someone at the table with this thing without a lot of damage to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the burst, when we're talking about ramp, like, you can, first of all, you should be running more lightning bolts. You heard it here first. But
Murphy, we could only run 1 per deck.
There's a lot of lightning bolts.
There's a lot of lightning bolts, guys. There's a lot. You can run your murders. You can run Doomblades. But you don't want to hit a Llanowar Elf. Like, you don't want to do an even exchange on mana against an elf deck because they're always going to win the mana game. Like, you want to bolt their Elvish Arc Druid, right? You want to bolt their Heritage Druid. You want to be virtually up in the exchange and hitting those big burst enablers. I was thinking of, the new kid on the block, Circle of Dreams Druid. Gaia's Cradle Baby does a lot of work in some of these more mid-rangey and then combo-oriented green X Elfball decks. If you're waiting until the end game to interact with the elf player, you've lost. And if you want to be really mean, you can bolt their turn 1 Llanowar Elf. That might actually just take them off a playable hand. So it depends on how you want to be, because you don't have to run that many lands in the average elf ball deck, right? Because the curve is so low and they have so many ramp creatures at the 1 and 2.
Yeah, Squee McGee, used to be a part of our channel. He had a Reese the Redeemed deck. It's infamous. Everyone's heard of it. But I actually think he only ran 27 lands in it, 28. And I even think, like, the last time that he had that deck, he was considering getting it down to like 24 or 25. Because he was just like, I get mana flooded. And it's like, oh my gosh, you only have 25 lands in your deck. How are you mana flooded? It's just Elfball. That's what it does. The next area is going to be tons of tokens. So traditionally, elf decks, they are able to produce a lot of these 1/1 fuckers in the elf warrior varietal, just the plain elf varietal. And a lot of times you get swarmed, and it's like your doubling season type of effects. We don't need to go into a ton of details there. Your anointed processions of the world, parallel lives, stuff like that. The ones that I actually thought were cute that people should be made aware of is like March of the Multitudes. This is a card that I am starting to see has a lot of play in elf decks. X green, white, white instant. It has create X 1/1 white soldier creature tokens with lifelink. But the thing that makes it unique, guys, is with it being an instant and having convoke. So now all these tokens, hey, you're in step. You've heard of the Cyclonic Rift rigmarole. Well, have you seen March of the Multitudes? Let me tap down 15 creatures, make 15 warriors or soldiers, as long as I had the other 3 mana. That's a ridiculous card. And then a very mainstayed one would be Second Harvest. That card's disgusting. Instant speed. I think it's 3 and a green. You make a copy of every token on your battlefield. End card. No downside. No sacrifice them at end of turn. Nothing. Some things that I thought would be cute to kind of battle some of these tokens. I think Suture Priest is a card that needs to get played a lot more. Suture Priest, colorless white. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life. But guys, whenever your opponents have creatures enter the battlefield, they actually lose a life.
It's so good.
It's a May effect. So if you want to play crazy political game guy, it's like, hey, you did have 10 ETB. How about you just lose 5? I'm not a mean guy. How about you lose 5 life? I'll let you keep the other 5. So I thought that's a card that a lot of people need to have out. And another one Don't judge me, guys. You know I like gross, disgusting cards that are really mean and no one wants to play with you. So Magus of the Tabernacle should clearly come to the table here. 3 colorless white guys. It basically gives you Tabernacle. It is a 2/6, which is pretty cool. But all creatures have at the beginning of your upkeep sack the creature unless you pay a colorless. That seems like a great way to deal with an Elfball deck, whether they have tokens or not, just trying to get rid of them. Yeah, you might have 100 mana, but you're going to have to spend 90 of it to keep your board state alive.
Right, and since their mana's on creatures, they're going to have to tap down those creatures to save them, and so many of those tokens just aren't worth keeping, right? The card I found as I was doing research for this episode that is underplayed, I think, is Pendril Mists, right? Because raise your hand if you have money for a Tabernacle. Nope. Okay, cool. But Pendril Mists is 3 and a blue, and it does Tabernacle. And it's on an enchantment, which is a categorically harder permanent type to take care of, and it's in a budget-ish range. But I totally get you here, and I think we need to not be afraid, fam. We need to not be afraid of playing Pyroclasm. Like, this is a, we're not a CEDH cast or community or anything like that, but I think something we can take from the CEDH community and from Legacy too is that efficiency matters, and 2 damage is a lot of damage, especially in a tokens deck. Now, if they start pumping them with things like Imperious Perfect or whatever, like that changes things, changes the math, but not by a lot. So those broad damage-based sweepers are kind of what I was thinking about.
Well, and to add to your damage-based sweepers, Echoing Decay is a great card with that as well.
So
colorless
good.
black. Instant target creature and all other creatures with the same name as that creature get -2/-2 until end of turn. You're about to get your Anthem effect. Let me get those 1/1s and 2/2s out of here.
And the thing I really like about damage-based removal is you can build your deck to keep that in mind. Like, if you are Gruul and your creatures are big, if you're Grixis and you just don't have a lot of creatures, or is it without a lot of creatures, you don't care about a Pyroclasm. Your creatures laugh it off, or you just laugh about having creatures at all. Another card I'm really into is Aether Flash. This is a red 2 enchantment. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, deal 2 damage to it. It's just like a permanent standing Pyroclasm.
That's so mean.
Yeah, and it's 4 mana, so people get a chance to build out under it. It's not going to address anything that's already in play. And once the table has 4 mana, that's where big creatures start coming out, right? Where if you're playing Honest, you're going to have 3/3s and 4/4s that just shrug off the Aether Flash. If your deck is determined to just, if on 1 mana you make a 1/1, and on 2 mana you make 2 1/1s, and on 3 mana you make 3 1/1s, you're up to something. If Aether Flash bricks your deck, you're up to no good. Put an end to that. And that's the same reason I like Plague Engineer. That card.
Oh, yeah.
Like, Plague Engineer, this is a Legacy lesson, by the way. Plague Engineer is a Legacy staple, and it comes up in a shocking number of ways, where it just like a 2/2 Death Touch is just a reasonable body on its own. You can trade that for a Tarmogoyf for whatever, and it'll mop up like Thalia or like some stacks pieces. There's a lot of X1 creatures laying around that are stacks pieces. There's a lot of it'll clear up token armies, Saprolings, elves, whatever. If you can bounce it, replay it, flicker it, whatever, you can change things around. Like, there's a lot of ways to build your deck around a card like Plague Engineer, or at least a way to use it.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know if this is legal or how it should work, but I did for a little bit run Plague Engineer in my Yarok deck for the double ETB, but I would just see, okay, I'm only going to get one of them. I get to resolve one. It's a state-based action, so the -1's going to apply. I see elves and thopters out there. Let me pick thopters, wipe out all the thopters, and then we'll static on elves for the final resolution, and then it's gone. Don't know if that's exactly legal. I think it is.
Yeah, that's not how that works.
Well, how does it work then with state-based? Because you would choose a creature type, it's resolved, it's now on thopters, the -1 would have to apply to them all, and they would instantly die.
You're right about that part. The part that that you are misinterpreting a little bit is Yarok doubles triggered abilities. As this enters the battlefield, choose X is not a triggered ability. It's a replacement effect that modifies how this thing arrives on the battlefield. So, like,
well, it looks like everyone in our play group sucks because I've been doing that for freaking years, including I suck.
Yeah, I mean, if it was like when this, so triggered abilities have the words if or when or whenever.
If, when, whenever, yep.
Yeah, something that says as it enters does not, if it said when it enters, but Plague Engineer is as it enters the battlefield, make a choice. So that doesn't work. Like, you don't get to briefly pick one color, then switch to another color off Painter Servant. You don't get to briefly name one card, then pick another one off Phyrexian Revoker. Like, that's just a totally different class of abilities.
Fair enough. Well, the only other thing that I thought would be worth mentioning around the token piece before we move to the last category around this is Detention Spheres, I think, is another great card, and Echoing Truth. But granted, those are just good for token decks in general. But the elf ones, I'll say, guys, if you have an elf player in your play group, the challenge I've personally had with Truth and Sphere and Decay, to be honest, any of the ones where it's like with all the same name, in Commander and EDH, we don't get that a lot because it's a singleton game. So I've always been leery of, could this be a dead card in hand because someone doesn't have 10 elves for me to Detention Sphere or Echoing Truth. But I do think if you have that Elfball player in your group, it's probably safe to have it in the 99 because, let's be honest, we don't even see all the cards that we put in our decks when we play them. So at least it'll be there.
Yep, and I'll get one more for the road here. This is Washout. You're going to find a spot to cast Washout. This is a 3 and a blue sorcery. Return all permanents of the color of your choice to their owner's hand. You'll find something to bounce with this, even if it's not completely nuking an Elves player. You'll find a spot.
Well, the last area that we're going to get to is the pump it up, because that's usually what happens when you have the token army come at you through hook or by crook. Crater Hoof is one that we see a lot with elf decks. Some others, Cathar's Crusade is one that you see with a lot of token decks and elf decks. One I thought would be cool to kind of talk about would be Echoing Courage is another one that I thought would probably get to see some play. Colorless green, target creature and all other creatures with the same name get +2/+2 till end of turn, instant speed. And that stuff can kind of sneak up on you because I can't tell you how many times it's like, oh, I'm getting hit with 10 1/1s. That sucks, but let me hold back my blockers because I got something else I need to do. And then they pump up or triple their power and I die. So I thought the best way to deal with this, there's propaganda effects, but, a little Ensnaring Bridge never did anyone wrong. Ensnaring Bridge, guys, if you're not familiar, is an artifact, 3 colorless, creatures with power greater than the number of cards in your hand can't attack. And if you're like me, you rarely ever have cards in your hand because you don't play draw card spells. So, the 1/1s or the 2/2s, they can get through. But a lot of times it's like, hey, I'm going to smack you with 10 elves with trample and all this other stuff. And Ensnaring Bridge literally protects you to where they're kind of SOL. So that was one that I thought was pretty cool. BoshNRoll, what's one way you think people could battle the big power token army of elves coming at them?
Well, my first response to that is listen to the last two things we talked about. Constrict the mana so they don't have the token army. If they get the token army, play answers to the token army. But now,
it's too late.
Yes, if you have failed in these endeavors, there's a bunch of cards that punish all attacking creatures, like Aetherize. 3 and a blue instant, bounce all attacking creatures. That's return them to their owner's hand for those who don't know the parlance. There is, I'm forgetting the name of it right now, but I believe there is an angel that does the same thing, like some flash angel. It might have Convoke. Brain farting at the moment, but that thing, ETBs, exiles all attacking creatures. There's a lot of things that have that sort of effect on them. There's also lots of things that are like, whenever a creature attacks you, deal 1 to it. And so they need to pump it, and if the trick's coming before you decide on their blocks, because you know how big they are before they're coming in, or else they're just dead. There's a number of effects like that. The way I find them is I use Scryfall and go to the advanced search, and on the card text, I do something like whenever a creature attacks, hit search, and then just see what exists for triggered abilities when a creature attacks. And there's lots of cool options across all the colors out there.
Yeah, BoshNRoll, one that goes very well with that is Revenge of the Ravens. Or Revenge of Ravens. That's 3 colorless black. Whenever a creature attacks you, that creature's controller loses a life and you gain a life.
Yeah, so, I believe Hissing Miasma is a similar card.
Yep. Oh. Yeah, and with this too, well, just thinking about this responding to attackers, right? Because like when they Finale of Devastation for the hoof, and everything gets plus 20 or plus 60 or whatever, and the table's about to die, 2 things are generally true. 1, the elf player has blown their load. Like they're done. And 2, they're anticipating that the table's done too. So the 2 cards that I always love, never leave them at home, folks. Rakdos Charm, which one of the modes is deal 1 damage to target player for each creature they control. That can sometimes just snap kill somebody. But the second one is Constant Mists.
I have that up on Scryfall right now.
Oh,
yeah, you beat me to it.
Constant Mists is 2 mana for a fog effect, but it has buyback, sacrifice a land. And my friends, I have won many games on the back of Constant Mists. And if you fog, even just fog an elf player when they go for the kill with Finale and Crater Hoof or Endrazor Behemoth, whatever, their game's done. Like they're dead on the next turn because everybody's seen their game. Like it's basically destroy target elf player. They can't be regenerated. is the actual text of those cards.
Love it. And there is Darkness and Dawn Charm across multiple colors. Like many colors have fogs.
Yeah, Dawn Charm is something that you should be playing way more of if you haven't. That card is one hell of a drug. It feels incredible.
And how about a little command? Just tap them.
Well, I know a lot of people are sometimes down on Constant Mists because of the sacrifice effect of the land. I think people just need to understand this. It's either you go down a land or you go down all of the cards on the table because you have to scoop up. So you're not using Constant Mists to prevent 5 damage or prevent them from getting 3 treasures. That's not why you're using it. You're using it for literally, I'm about to have to shuffle up my 100 cards and wait while everyone else finishes the game. So going down the 1 land for the buyback is seriously not a big deal. And to be honest, if that one player just keeps coming at you and you have to Constant Miss over and over to buy back, maybe look in the mirror and realize you're the one that's actually about to win the game and you're clearly the threat. Or the other 2 players is going to recognize that and they're going to see that elf player open and just go ahead and go for the jugular because they see that you're doing nothing but going down lands and saving yourself. So Constant Miss, I definitely think that's a sleeper and should be played more.
And Constant Miss is a great rattlesnake. And I don't know if this terminology is still used among the kids. Like rattlesnake is a signal that you don't want to attack me. Like you're shaking your rattle, just keep your distance. If somebody attacks you, gets Constant Miss, you buy it back once, they know that card's in your hand.
Yep.
Do they want to spend another combat phase messing around with you? Or do they want to take their business elsewhere? And if they do keep coming at you, like Mr. Combo just said, recognize that you're the threat if it's worth it.
All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap up our kind of countermeta around Green X Elfball. Let's hear a little bit about the CMDTower store and head to our last segment, the one you've been waiting for, the Council. Hey there, Collective. Do you need a new playmat? Do you need some sleeves? Have you been forgetting your upkeep triggers? Well, be sure to head over to cmdtower.com/merch and be able to pick up all the great swag made for you guys. It could be the Mr. Comma number 5 reminder token. It could be the Squee McGee Get Up and Fight coin, or heck, even our foil playmat or Jund holiday sweaters. All of it's there. Go check it out. It is time. It is the Council of the Unbanned. Yes, I have returned from my 12-week hiatus. I don't know if that's actually accurate, but that's what we're going with. I, Mr. Comma number 5, bring forth to Judge BoshNRoll to ask to unban a very fair card that's even seen a printing in Strixhaven. I mean, I'm just saying. I think Channel deserves a chance to see the light of day. And if you are not familiar with Channel, the most fair and balanced card of all of Magic, outside of Alter the Brood, it is as reads. Green, sorcery. Hey, that's fair. Sorcery speed. I can't do it on your turns. It's a mythic. And it states, until end of turn, anytime you could activate a mana ability, you may pay 1 life. If you do, add a colorless. It is banned in every format, not legal in every format, except for Vintage where it's restricted. So the card's seen better days. It's seen more decks than it has in past. But I'm here to give you facts, not feelings. Fact 1, it adds, and I'm going to go there, diamond mana. Not even colorless, it's diamond. The hell is that? Get out of here, wizards. But I'm always someone that's like, hey, I do Grim Monolith power artifact combos. I get infinite mana all the time. Do I win on the spot? Hardly ever. Infinite colorless mana doesn't actually do a lot. But hey, guys, you don't even get infinite here. You only got until your life total. So, yeah, if you want to, on turn 2, Channel, pay 10 life, and have a Kazi, I guess. There's nothing to say someone doesn't have a 1 mana Path to Exile or Swords to Plowshares. That's within the CMC as well. So that's one thing. You know, we talked about the sorcery speed. That's a big deal. You can only pay what you have. That's a big deal. And we have cards that are kind of loosely similar, but not the same. So I'm not saying they're the same. They operate differently. But once again, it's the whole paying life to get the value. Treasonous Ogre. Pay 3 life, get a red mana to your mana pool. I've tried to abuse that. I usually get to about 2 life, and then I can't do it anymore. And yeah, I got some value, but it's not like I just blew away the game and it was unfair. It's a very fair and balanced card. I could be shocked to death. Bolus's Citadel is another good one. That CMC, pay that in life, and you get to cast it just off the top of your library. Just straight gas, left and right. I talked about Grim Monolith Power Artifact. That's producing your infinite. I just think Channel not producing colors, being sorcery speed, and it's in green. Green already has all the ramp stuff out there. I just don't see it being on the ban list. Murphis, I'm sure you have objections. Things you would like to inquire about in my possibly insane state of mind. What do you got?
There's many questions I have. One is, how many times are you running Grim Monolith Power Artifact? That is some crazy dollary dues. But outside of that, Channel, yes, saw a reprint in Strixhaven.
It's a cool art.
That's misleading. It's a reprint in Mystical Archives, which was like cards from all over the place. Demonic Tutor saw a reprint too. So if I may approach the bench as a counselor here, I would say, number 1, the only place this card gets played is in Cube. And the only thing it does in Cube is, as Judge BoshNRoll, as you have said, things that are up to no good. Sure, it heads up in limited, people probably won't have the path when you're, turn 1 Ulamog, destroy a land or whatever. But I can imagine a world with a sufficiently large amount of life early in the game and something like, I don't know, a Thrasios that if you can't win the game at 2 life, you can't win the game. That's part of what I would say. Second thing, Wizards has learned their lesson. All of these cards that you stated aren't 2 mana, and they aren't in green. So Treasonous Ogre, the rate is a 3-1 on Channel, and then you have Bolas' Citadel, which is 1-1, but it also costs 6 mana unless you cheat it out somehow. And we don't even have like kind of the tinker lines and all that stuff because of the ban list. So I think that if we submit that Wizards is actually like they know what they're doing designing cards, which if for some number of years I questioned in the wake of Fire design philosophy. But I think they know what they're doing. They haven't done that again, and I think that that's pretty telling. And ultimately, if you're casting Channel in a deck, you are up to no good, and you will win the game with it on that turn. I don't know how. I don't know why. But you're not playing Channel to play a long, fair game. You know what I mean? So that's the evidence I submit to the bench.
Yeah, my argument here, I co-sign everything Murphis said. Like, this card is clearly... I was never going to be on the side of unbanning this one. This card is clearly up to no good. And so far we've talked about like green Ulamog or green Kozilek or green Karn Liberated. Like these sort of things. You
still have to pay 10 life. It's a lot of life.
You get 40. Who cares? You can win the game at 1.
He gets it, guys. He gets it. Your life total is a resource. Use.
Right. And we've only even talked about like what this looks like in green decks casting colorless spells.
Sure.
What if we are Golgari and we're storming? What if we are Jund and we're ad nauseuming? Like just the nonsense that this unlocks. Like, what are you going to do with all that colorless mana was one of the points made by our insane prosecutor. And the defense argues that mana doesn't all have to be colorless. Everything that comes out of the channel is colorless, at least to start. There's lots of cards that are like pay 2 colorless, get a color. What about like something like Pala, or I think like there's a number of elves that do this where you could filter colorless into color. And all of that requires a little bit of work, but it's there. And Channel reminds me very much of another card we haven't talked about yet, which is one Dockside Extortionist. 2 mana, get mana. Let's talk about 2 mana, get mana as a plan. Dockside Extortionist, people are playing Goblin Matron in decks where there's only 1 goblin to get because it's just worth it to have 2 Docksides. Channel, you could get it with Spellseeker. You can transmute for this thing with Muddle the Mixture or Shred Memory. Like, this is the type of card people will play bad cards in their deck just to go get. And that's a sign that something is sick and should not be really around. And if that puts Dockside in the crosshairs too, it probably should be.
It should be.
We talked about that in our Discord today. Yeah, we talked about that on our Discord today, and someone actually made the best point I've heard about Dockside. Channel, arguing against myself, is solitaire. You just worry about your world and that's it. Dockside literally doesn't work if your opponents don't have artifacts and enchantments. And outside of the competitive worlds where it's a lot of 0 and 1 drop because you're trying to get there super quick, the normal commander games, I only have 1 Dockside. And I have played it and only got the big nut of mana, maybe 2 out of 20 castings. Most of the time I'm getting 4 or 5. It's not 15 or 20. So just a little defense for Dockside here so it doesn't get the axe.
Right. Like in the low power world, when it's triggering off of like privileged positions instead of Mox Diamonds, it's a very different card. But Channel asks for no such qualifications. It simply asks that you have some of your 40 starting life points left. Holy guacamole, that's so much life. And what if we pair it with life gain? What if we're in some sort of like Selesnya base situation where you cast this thing at 70? I don't know your business. This could happen.
It's still colorless.
Oh, it doesn't matter.
Counselor colorless does so much damage, and you know it too. I see the smirk on your face, Counselor.
Channel was banned in EDH before we had Eldrazi cards. And since then, we have had multiple sets that include Eldrazi cards. We've introduced Karn as a planeswalker who has multiple printings. There's just so many colorless things to be doing right now that it's preposterous to... Like, I want to compare this to Animar's Soul of Elements, who at least in my circles, is kind of an eye roll commander of it's like, okay, how fast can this jerk get up to Kozilek? Like that's sort of the equation that the whole table's running. And if any green deck just gets to threaten Animar from 0 anytime they have 2 mana, I don't think that's healthy for the world.
Well, believe it or not, guys, I believe my quote unquote opposition or just pulling your chains, and they're going to vote to unban this thing. Let's go. I'm voting to unban Channel for the fact of it's not a poo-poo card. How about you, BoshNRoll?
I'm about to change this channel. Keep it banned.
Murphis?
I have to agree. Ban Channel. Ban it, burn it. Don't let it see the light of day. If we can point to one card on the ban list and say that this was a mistake to print, it might be Channel.
I legitimately thought you were about to say, let's unban it just so we can ban it again.
A part of me in my heart wants to. The bitterness deep within me wants to unban it so that people buy a bunch of copies and then ban it again. Does that make me a terrible person?
Wow, stonks. Reverse stonks.
Reverse stonks. It's actually a good reverse stonks, because what we didn't know is Murphis has just piles of Channel cards just sitting in his closet.
Yeah, I can actually see some of them behind him on camera. They're like flowing out of every space and crevice.
Whoa!
He's actually buried up to his neck in Channels right now.
Thanks for getting sweaty with us. And remember, if you're looking for more fire content, check out the rest of what CMDTower puts out. And remember, I'm Mr. Comma number 5.
And I'm Murphis.
And I'm BoshNRoll.
And remember, cold takes are temporary, but those hot takes, they last for eternity.